So recently, I've been thinking about all the various different characters in My Hero Academia, particularly in Class 1A. I think the show has the tendency to hyper-focus on a handful of main characters and showcase their quirks to the absolute maximum. But the more I think about it, the more I wonder. Is the reason that these characters get the most focus simply because the quirks that many of Class 1A have are just not good? Has the author realized that these quirks just can't compete in most situations? So today I want to go through each of the different quirks of Class 1A from bad to god level and see if this is actually the case. So we'll start with the quirks that have the least usefulness across the hero profession. Some of these might be the most useful quirk in a particular context, but it's more of an average. How useful are you in a random scenario? So we'll start with perhaps the worst quirk of all, Tailman and his quirk, Tail. He's not exceptionally strong, he's fast but not super fast. And his agility, which is the major benefit of his tail, is matched by Froppy, Midoriya, Bakugo, and Zero, who all have more utility beyond that. This quirk is the most vanilla of all. It's the king of average quirks. Next up, we have Sugar Rush, and at first glance, this looks like a good quirk. A 5-fold strength increase per 10 grams of sugar, so he should be great for combat and rescue. But then there's a problem. He has this boost for 3 minutes. So he needs to get the job done fast or beat the villain fast or he loses the power up. So this means for extended situations he needs to keep popping sugar into his mouth. Imagine that, cramming lollies into your mouth in the middle of a death match. But then this also unleashes the second weakness. The sugar conversion makes him hypoglycemic, which makes him lethargic and stupid. Imagine he's trying to save you from a collapsed building and then he lays down to have a nap, or he can't think straight and pulls the wrong piece of rubble away and you get crushed. And we've also seen how this leaves him vulnerable in battle. It's a quirk that seems good, but its drawbacks make it almost unusable. Then we've got invisibility, and this is one of those powers that seems like it would be awesome. But when it comes down to the average day's work for a hero, it feels like this quirk leaves you woefully unprepared. You can't really use gear, because then you won't be invisible, so that puts you at a disadvantage straight away. Sure, you can sneak up on people and use stealth attacks, but it doesn't make you any stronger. In a world filled with hugely powerful quirks that enhance strength or give otherworldly abilities, this just can't hope to compete. Our hero's job isn't all stealth and finding out secrets, and even then, anyone with a smelling or hearing quirk could probably find you anyway, or a heat-seeking quirk. See the huge downside? And then we have Naval Laser, and this is one of those quirks that should be so good. It shoots a laser beam out of your navel that can disintegrate concrete and metal, but the drawbacks ruin it completely. You can only shoot it in short spurts, and over a short period of time before it starts to affect your bowels and make you need to use the toilet. And I assume it also gives you stomach cramps, which would make you pretty vulnerable in battle, and unable to do really any extended hero work or fighting, so bad luck if you had that quirk. So that's the end of the quirks that I'd consider to be low tier, so now I want to go through some of the quirks that are good, but maybe not great. We'll start with Anna Voice. I mean, when you really think about this, it would be pretty useful for combat, rescue, or even stealth. Being able to command animals like your own private army would be really useful. But that being said, you can only really use bulk animals like pigeons or insects, and you can't be a top level fighter with those. It's not like you can just travel around with a grizzly bear or a tiger or a rhino to help you out, so whilst it's good, it's very situational and there's a lot of better quirks in the class. But it's not actively bad either. Then we arrive at Acid, and I think this is a pretty good combat focused quirk. You can melt through almost anything, which makes you a pretty formidable opponent, although this is offset by the fact that eventually your skin's going to start to burn from overuse. It's probably not good for close combat, but since you can slip and slide yourself around on the acid, it isn't really too much of an issue. That being said, you need a good aim, and your use in stealth is pretty minimal, although you might have some use in certain types of rescues. Then we go to Pop-Off, and I think this is a pretty underestimated one, and I think that's probably because Minetta's a dweeb. But I think it's really useful for combat. You can set some pretty powerful traps and immobilize people in the middle of a fight. That being said, whilst it's good, it's not exactly top tier. It's not likely to get any sort of knockout, and you'd probably need the help of somebody with a power quirk to help finish the job. Then I'd put Jupla Arms. And this gives you an extra set of extendable tentacle arms adjacent to your regular arms that can grow other parts of the body on the tip, like a mouth, ears, or just fists. So already you can see how this is a good one for stealth and spying, but it's pretty good for combat too, because it essentially grants you super strength, at least for your upper body. Say you want to hit somebody. Now you can punch them with the force of 3 arms instead of 1. In a rescue situation, you can lift with the strength of 6 arms instead of 2. It's really the perfect all-rounder type of quirk in my opinion. Zero Gravity is a pretty middle-of-the-pack type quirk. It seems like it would be pretty useful. Levitating stuff is a pretty nifty trick after all. And you'd be pretty handy in rescue situations, but your limit's 3 tons and you burn out quickly with how often you use your power. So extended rescues are pretty much off the table. On top of that, it's pretty limited in combat. You can set some traps, sure, but getting in close is pretty risky as you don't have any other defenses besides the Quirk. On top of that, it's hard to launch things at a very high velocity. You'd have to construct a plan to do so or get a partner. And those moves are pretty easily dodged anyway, so yeah, middle of the pack. And this brings us to Tape, and this is one of those powers that seems so lame at first and not really useful at all. But it's basically a Spider-Man rip-off Quirk, so it can't be all that bad. It has insane mobility and lets you swing around as you please, as well as being useful in combat situations to restrain enemies, trip people up, launch projectiles, or people around. Pretty much your Spider-Man, but unlike Spider-Man, you don't have super strength or heightened senses, so it doesn't rank as high as it could. And up next, I'd put Earphone Jack. Now this is a pretty good all-around Quirk. It's pretty much a perfect Quirk for spying or recon or rescue style missions, as it lets you hear faint sounds or isolate specific noises. Plus, it can be used in combat in conjunction with support gear to shoot out sonic blasts or burst your opponent's eardrums. I think this is one of those quirks that is really underrated, which is a shame because to me it feels so versatile and so useful. Frog's up next. Now the premise of this quirk is you can do whatever a frog can do, if a frog was insanely strong. It allows Froppy to grip a variety of different surfaces, gives her a hugely powerful extendable tongue, increases the power in her legs beyond normal human abilities, lets her store items in her stomach, allows her to camouflage, lets her secrete different mucuses with different powers such as paralysis, and gives her increased agility on land and in water, so she's pretty useful for basically everything. The only downside is she can't really handle environmental extremes, which means she can't really ascend much higher than this. Engine's up next, and I'll admit, at first, I did not rate this one. Super speed really isn't that exciting when you put it up against some of the other quirks the class members have. But when you think about it, it's pretty lethal in combat. The faster you go, the more force you're going to generate when you hit somebody. Engine, especially with its Recipro Burst, could pretty much let you one-hit KO anybody with an epic kick. I mean, honestly, in real life it would actually probably kill them, but whatever. Plus, being super fast is also useful in certain rescue or getaway situations, so there's a bit of versatility there, even if it's mainly a combat quirk. Electrification is next, and I'll admit this is one of those quirks that probably should be lower on the list, simply because despite its immense power, it fries your brain and renders you useless. But before that happens, you're insanely strong. Very few people, no matter what their quirk is, are going to be able to resist getting their synapses fried out by somebody that can shoot out pure electrical energy. You could essentially become a living bomb and take out a small army in a close combat situation, at the cost of your brain. Or you can shoot out powerful shots like a lightning bolt gun. Basically, you become a living taser. Considering how much of an effect tasers have on regular people, imagine what this could do. But yeah, it's definitely limited by the fact that it fries your brain, and it's pretty much useful exclusively for combat or charging batteries. Creation is another one of those quirks that you forget about for ages and sort of write off as being not very useful. But when you think about it, it's the perfect utility quirk provided you're actually smart. You just have to know the atomic configuration of whatever you want to make, so depending on how smart you are, or at least how good your memory is, you can materialize the right item for any occasion, whether that's armor, weapons, or tools. In combat, nobody can really predict what you're going to do, and it's supremely useful for fighting, rescue, or even espionage now that I think about it. I'd put Hardening next, and that's because it lets you become a living tank, an impenetrable wall, or a devastating wrecking ball. It's pretty much just a combat quirk, but it has such power that I really think it has to be towards the top of the list. Becoming that physically strong is a game changer. There's not really much more to say. Dark Shadow's up next, and this one's a good all-rounder with so many different uses. It can watch your back, lend you strength, be used to enhance your physical abilities, attack people at range, and keep enemies away from you. It could probably also be useful for spying, and obviously good for search and rescue. It's basically a super strong conjoined twin situation. Plus, if you lose control, it becomes God tier. Sure, you become an uncontrollable ball of rage and anger, but you can whoop anybody's ass that doesn't have a light-based quirk. Now, next up, I'm going to go with Explosion, which lets you use your palm sweat to create explosions of various sizes. Now, this might be a little bit controversial considering Bakugo's basically the top dog as of right now, but I wanted to look more at the quirk itself rather than the very exceptionally skilled user. At its maximum potential, this quirk probably isn't quite as strong as some of the other top quirks. Explosions are strong, but so's fire. The explosions give him extreme mobility, but so does One for All at its fully realized potential. It's not really fair though, because those two quirks are kind of combo quirks and are naturally going to be stronger in general than this one. I'd go Hot and Cold next. Hellfire that can scorch and incinerate basically anything. Ice that can deep freeze anything in an instant. You have no risk of overheating and no risk of freezing. You're essentially the perfect weapon and have no real weaknesses. The only quirk stronger than this would be one that's ridiculously overpowered and pulls new abilities out of thin air for the sake of the plot. And that brings us to One for All, a stockpiling quirk that is passed down along generations that absorbs the power of its users and stores them in a host body. Plus, spoiler alert for the future, it also absorbs the quirks of the past users and can pass them on too. So you have the quirks and the accumulated strength of all the users who have come before you coursing through your body. This quirk's nuts. So yeah, it's clearly going to be the top spot, but it's not even fair. It's really not fair. So that brings me to the end of the list, and yeah, I can see why certain characters get more screen time than others. Simply put, some quirks just can't hack it in the main story battles against the villains. That being said though, I think some of the minor character quirks are actually pretty good and they probably need a lot more screen time than they're getting at the moment. But anyway, that's just my opinion, and now I'd like to hear yours. Putting the individual characters aside, how would you rank the different quirks of Class 1A? I'm curious to hear what you have to say, so make sure to leave a comment and let me know.